Some people think that there's maybe some truth to the fact that West Coast investors don't look at startups in the East. Well, we're about to hear how that's not true. We're going to hear from Google Ventures on why they do look at companies here and how companies can flourish in the Southeast, just like their portfolio company, Pindrop Security. So please help me welcome Tyson Clark of Google Ventures and Vijay Balasubramaniyan of Pindrop Security, as well as our moderator, John Shieber of TechCrunch. Round of applause, everyone. Oh, maybe they're busy closing a deal. Hold on. Here they come. They're close. They're on their way. Come on out, guys. You've been introed already. Hey. Here they are, everyone. Let them hear it.
Great. Excellent. So thank you all for sticking around. Thanks to the folks at 3686 and the lovely state of Tennessee for having me. I appreciate it. Got a little bit of housewarming, sort of house notes to do before we jump right into the conversation. The first thing is I will be taking questions via the Twitters. So if y'all want to tweet at me with any questions you might have in addition to using the mics, you can do that. My Twitter handle is just my last name, my first initial J, last name Shieber, S-H-I-E-B-E-R at J Shieber, and there I am on the Twitters. So that's one thing. I'm very glad to have my two fellow panelists with me, Vijay Balasubramaniyan and Tyson Clark? Clark? Is that how you pronounce it? Clark. Not right, yes. To discuss investing in the Southeast. One thing to note, just to sort of set the stage on this very beautiful stage, there was over $10 billion invested in venture capital in total in the first quarter of 2016 versus around $15 billion a year ago. So the mood of the market is a little bit chastened. Over that same time, though, there was $1 billion invested in the Southeast region in the first quarter of 2016. So it seems like y'all are already doing something right. And that number is well up from last year. So in 2015, first quarter 2015, it was under 500 million. So something to keep in mind. Mr. Balasubramaniyan, the first question I have for you, sir, is well, first tell us a little bit about Pindrop and what it does, and then maybe give us a little bit of a sense of why you're in the Southeast now.
Yep, absolutely. So Pindrop Security is a company that provides security, trust, and identity for everything related to voice. So examples of this is you call your bank, and they want to know who you are. They ask you a whole bunch of stupid questions, right? What's your mother's maiden name? What's your date of birth? We avoid all of that because we have technology that can identify any phone device anywhere in the world from its sound signature. And so what that allows us to do is both identify good customers as well as stop bad guys from talking to banks, talking with telcos, and so on and so forth. So that's what we do at Pindrop.
And what brought you to the Southeast? How did you get here?
Yeah, so
Atlanta, which is where y'all are based.
Yeah, so we're based out of Atlanta. I did my PhD from Georgia Tech.
Okay.
And so I did my PhD from Georgia Tech, and once I published the final paper at Georgia Tech, we got a lot of banks calling me, asking to license the technology. And then we started Pindrop. And the funny fact is, Georgia Tech Computing School graduates 3,600 students every year. That's more than MIT, Stanford, and CMU put together. Wow. And so there's a lot of talent there. And, raising money in the West Coast and spending it in the East Coast is actually...
Hold your horses there, buddy. We'll get there. We'll get there. Rein it in. Don't get ahead of you. We got 22 minutes to fill, man. Come on.
I talk a lot.
Tyson, how did you meet these guys? How did you hear the Pindrop, as it will?
That's a good one.
Yeah, thanks. I tried.
Yeah, so at Google Ventures, now GV, we're trying actively to make sure we're not just searching for great deals in Silicon Valley. There's smart people everywhere. So we made a concerted effort in the last couple of years to get outside of our comfort zone and try to understand some of these ecosystems that are outside of Silicon Valley.
That's well and good. How did you get introduced to Pindrop is my question. So specifically,
to answer your question, so Vijay and I met at a conference in Atlanta, a conference much like this one that highlighted sort of local venture capital community, but also the local ecosystem of entrepreneurs. And we met, and it was Is a match made in heaven? I mean, that's just my take on it. I don't know. Is that cool?
It warms the cockles of my heart.
Romance.
So is that typical for GV? Is that how y'all get most of your deals, is through going out to these conferences and tech events and meeting different startups?
Yeah, I don't know if, I wouldn't say that, but I would say it's probably the best way for us to learn about a new ecosystem that we're not familiar with, right? So we haven't invested in Miami, for instance. We haven't invested in other cities. And I imagine the way that we'll probably do that is kind of going to conferences like this just to understand who the investors are, who the entrepreneurs are, what the accelerators are, so on and so forth.
There's one that Pitbull runs in Miami that you should check. I'm not kidding.
Is that right?
He's like a big proponent of Miami, of sort of South Florida tech.
I'll check it out.
So if it's not really how GV traditionally sources deals, how would you say that y'all do traditionally sourced deals? I understand that there's a little bit of a quant mentality to sort of what y'all do. It's kind of data driven. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably most venture capital firms use some sort of a data-driven approach.
Right.
In terms of how we source deals, I think most deals actually come through either the broader Google or Alphabet network, or just the networks of our individual investors. But we're certainly taking a data-driven approach to how we invest. Certainly, I think, as do most VCs.
Right. Now, how many pitches have y'all gotten from companies in the Southeast? How many meetings have y'all actually taken?
And I don't know if I could throw out a number,
right?
Because we're meeting a lot of companies, period. But I know we've invested in, call it 4 or 5 companies in the Southeast.
Out of the how large is the portfolio in total?
There are over 300 companies in the portfolio total. So that's fair enough. Fair enough.
I mean,
it's a process. It's a process. Okay.
So Vijay, you mentioned the 3,600 entrepreneurs, 3,600 graduates that come out of Georgia Tech every year.
Yep.
Some of them want to be entrepreneurs. What do you see as being the value of starting a business down here in the Southeast? What do you like about it?
So for me, I think, a business, there are 3 parts, right? There's the money, there's the customers, so the market fit, and then there's the employees, right? Having an ecosystem like Georgia Tech has been wonderful for us because we've raised rounds in the East Coast. You can get on a plane and get money from anywhere, right? Money is money. And so that was something that we figured out early on, that we really didn't need to restrict ourselves to our ecosystem, right? We got on a plane. I would go in the morning, fly out in the morning, go do pitches on Sand Hill Road, and fly back that day night. So it was just a one-day flight to the Valley, and we got all our money from the Valley, and customers are also global. So, once you get used to the idea that you need to be on a plane to build a business, it doesn't matter where you get money from. But at the same time, once you have that money, we're able to stretch that dollar so much more, right? Like we regularly go in bidding wars against, Silicon Valley companies, which offer over $200K for an employee, and we get them for less than $150K. Right? And so it's one of those things that we've been able to stretch the dollar by a huge amount by being based out of the Southeast.
Yeah, no, I hear that, but I wonder how many entrepreneurs will have the benefit of the sort of inbound interest that you had. It sounds like, just from the story that you tell about how the company got started, you published this paper, which was your doctoral research? Or?
Yep, it was my PhD work.
Yeah, okay, so you published this doctoral thesis, and then banks start calling you up immediately, and they're like, oh, this is incredible. You need to turn this into a business.
Yep.
For entrepreneurs that don't have that kind of inbound, do you think the same thesis applies? Because I don't mean to be sort of critical, but you seem pretty blasé. I flew on a plane, I went out to the Valley, had a couple meetings, raised some money. How long did it take you to raise that first round?
Yeah, so the first round took us a while, right? But the big thing there was we didn't go raise our first round from investors. The first round that I raised was actually using what's known as the Small Business Innovation Research Grant from National Science Foundation, which originally gave $150K. We hired our first engineers, and over the life, that grant gave us about $1 million without non-dilutive. So that's how we raised our first round. And through that first round, we got our first customers. So I don't think it matters, that we had inbound interest. That was great. But the first thing that you need to do as an entrepreneur is hustle to find customers.
Right.
Because once you find customers, everybody else lines up.
Right, and that's true, I think, whether you're working with an enterprise company, not to address the broader audience and start pontificating, but y'all are warned, I'm going to start pontificating now. That's true whether you've got a sort of enterprise company that's doing business-to-business stuff or a consumer company, right? If you're looking for whether it's customers or whether it's users,
Yep.
you need to have that base in place before you go raise capital, especially now.
Yep.
With the markets the way it is.
Yeah.
They are. Okay, now that said, and also a little plug, if you want to hear more about alternative sources of capital, I'll be doing a panel on that tomorrow in a salon session, so stick around tomorrow afternoon. How long did it take you actually from start to finish to raise the first round? I feel like these sorts of things are insightful for entrepreneurs to hear.
So the first round that we raised after that
The
SBIR
SBIR
grant was in Feb of 2012, and it took us about a couple of months to raise that round.
2
months. 2 months.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's short, man. That is really short. That's not a long time.
But we had customers, right?
Right.
It just changes, right? When you can say, I have, one of the banks that's in Atlanta as a customer, right? In this case, it was SunTrust. And then we have another bank which is doing a POC, which is one of the top 4 banks. That's all we had, right? At that
Which
point
bank?
in time. It was Wells Fargo,
okay.
right? And so, to have that and go to investors, it just changes the conversation. More importantly, the way you raise money, you become in the driver's seat as opposed to taking money at whatever valuation. You can actually dictate some of those things if you have customers.
Who invested in that first round?
So in our first round, it was $1 million round. And that was Maynard Webb. So he's the CEO of eBay,
Right.
And then he's now he's the chairman of the Yahoo board.
Right.
So Maynard Webb, we had few folks from YouTube, a couple of folks from Facebook as the initial seed investors.
Did you go to one of the angel crowdfunding platforms, or what was this predates that?
I was just
Networking,
right?
Yeah.
Just who do you know here, and he'd done this startup called LiveOps, which was in the call center space.
Right.
That's how we got connected.
Yeah. I remember that. Okay, and Tyson, how did y'all came in on this most recent round?
That's right.
Which is Series C, right?
It's a 75.
Is that typical for what y'all are going to be looking at from this region, or is that not?
I mean, I'd say Pindrop is probably a bit later stage than a lot of companies that we invest in. We actually invested alongside Google Capital, which is the later stage fund for Google. So we'll typically be a bit earlier. I think our check sizes are between, call it $5 million on the low end,
Right.
15 to 25 million on the high end.
And sorry, go ahead. But with an investment like Pindrop, or investing in a new region for y'all, like the Southeast, would you look at later stage companies? Is that something that you'd look for?
We certainly, so we're stage agnostic. We don't do seeds, but we're stage agnostic. And so I think a lot of times it's easier to do diligence on a later stage company.
Right.
Especially if you have a lot of customers and you can call those customers and sort of do reference checks. A lot of earlier stage companies don't have the benefit of that. So I think if we entered into a space and did a deal, I don't necessarily think it would need to be a late stage deal. My guess is what we're looking for really is just some incredible technology and an awesome founder.
Right.
Yeah.
And did you find that with Pindrop? No, I'm kidding. Sorry.
No, he sucks.
That guy's the worst. We're just taking a flyer. We'll see what happens. Sorry, I want to get to this. If you were to, so there's a lot of talk about, or there was in the past a lot of talk about regional differences between Silicon Valley and New York, Silicon Valley and Boston. People like to set up these dichotomies. When you look at the entrepreneurs that you've seen coming out of the Southeast and look at what you've seen from Silicon Valley, what you see from Silicon Valley, do you see a difference? Are there things that Silicon Valley entrepreneurs do differently or better or worse, or what do how would you compare those two?
I mean, I think, I don't know better or worse, but I mean, I think the funding environment in Silicon Valley is different than it is anywhere else. And I think that affects entrepreneurs both in Silicon Valley and outside Silicon Valley. So, when you hear Vijay talk, he talks about being sort of like, scrappy and having your dollar stretch. That's a conversation that a lot of Silicon Valley VCs weren't saying as much of, a year ago. I think that, that pendulum is swinging, obviously.
Right.
I do think entrepreneurs outside Silicon Valley do tend to be a bit more, I don't know if scrappy is the right word, but they're out there networking really hard. They're out there, making sure the dollar stretches a long way. That's probably the biggest sort of single thing, just to make a generalization.
And Vijay, you fly back and forth between the coasts a lot. When you think about the ecosystems, such as they are in the Southeast versus Silicon Valley, how would you compare them?
So from an ecosystem, are you talking about the investor ecosystem, of the startup ecosystem?
Let's take both.
Okay.
Let's start with an investor ecosystem, and then tell me what you see from an entrepreneurial perspective, because I think it's important to map both.
So from an investor ecosystem, I think obviously the Valley is far more forward, right? Like they're giving you term sheets and things like that, which are pretty standard, and because they're seeing so much deal flow and they have to react so quickly, they're not trying to shortchange you in the term sheet. It's one of those things that works out really, really well. And so the biggest difference I find is that they're much more aware of what are normal term sheets, what are normal ways of investing, as compared to the Southeast, which tends, there's a lot more money in the Valley than in the Southeast.
Right.
So people are, a lot more careful. You can occasionally get term sheets that don't work out really well.
Did you take any money from any investors in the Southeast?
We did.
Who did you take money from?
So we had, in Atlanta, we had Hamilton Ventures and Bucket Investment Partners and Georgia Research Alliance.
Right.
So those were the three guys who were part of our, they were part of our seed round. But they were really, really forward thinking, and I think that's the important bit. Finding forward thinking investors is really, really important. And so that's the difference that I find in the investor community. Since there is a lot more money in the Valley, they are not risk averse, and they're more up to date with whatever the latest term sheets is. And this is true across all East Coast. The term sheets that we've seen from East Coast VCs versus West Coast VCs is drastically different. It's pretty interesting. Having said that, from a startup standpoint, it's really, really interesting. I think the startups that are formed in the Southeast tend to be far more meaningful. What I mean by that is they're just working on harder problems. It's one of those.
Is Yik Yak really working on a harder problem?
So, you can always find the one example that,
the one example that's raised $75 million.
For a Yik Yak, and I think,
No, I love those guys. They're great.
Even if they're not working on a harder problem, they're doing well, right? But, there's quite a few of them there, right? I just think that the problems, I invest too now. And so the entrepreneurs who come and talk to me, I always find that they're working on slightly harder problems.
Yeah.
And it makes it very interesting. So I think the ecosystem is pretty cool that way.
Right. And Tyson, from your travels around, how would you sort of stack up the ecosystems or businesses you see coming from the Southeast? You said they're scrappier versus what's happening in the Valley. Is there anything else that you...
Well, I think there's some interesting commonalities between some of these newer Silicon Valleys, or whatever you want to call them. There's usually an awesome pool of university talent, engineering talent somewhere nearby. So Toronto has Waterloo, Atlanta has Georgia Tech, and a whole bunch of other schools, quite frankly.
And a great airport.
Right.
And a great airport.
A big airport. Great.
So there tends to be a lot of intellectual capital in the area.
Right.
The other big thing is a lot of these places have either, in order to find the seed capital, which is the tough part. Silicon Valley has a bunch of people who have wealth. Miami has that too. So they have an interesting seed community there. In some other places, government has stepped in. They have grants in Toronto, for instance. Atlanta has grants as well. So there has to be either government or private individuals or some sort of combination to provide that seed stage of capital that gets these businesses started. That's the other major thing that I see in these places.
Yeah, I mean, actually, if I were to sort of think about the criteria that you need for a vibrant startup ecosystem. One is an engineering pool, which definitely the Southeast has sort of across the board. Right? There are lots of good engineering schools. There's lots of opportunity, but it seems like the one thing that's missing is that capital at the seed stage, right? And that's something that the Southeast needs to get a lot better at, it would seem to me, if they're going to have the kind of like startup community that can, rival New York or Boston or some of these other secondary ecosystems that have emerged. LA is another one as well.
Yeah.
Now, that said, it seems like people are waking up to the fact that there is this pool down here. What I'd like to see is more local capital, be supportive of the entrepreneurs that are in the region. Sorry, I say this as a Southerner. I'm from Louisiana, so I've like I've got a vested interest in this stuff. I'd like to be able to move out from New York and get back home. Yeah. Because Yankees, yikes. Sorry. I said it. I meant it. So there are some. Sorry. I gotta play the crowd, guys. Come on. There are some questions that are flooding in from the audience, and some of them are actually really good. So beyond healthcare, this is sort of looking broadly and not necessarily within y'all's wheelhouse, but beyond healthcare, are there investable verticals or themes that the West Coast is looking to or rising from the Southeast? And I guess, Tyson, this would be a question for you.
Interesting. Beyond healthcare, because healthcare is one that pops into my head right away.
Right. I wonder why.
Yeah, right. About a third of our investments are in healthcare. So I don't know if there's like specific verticals. I mean, I think it's less about the vertical, more about the horizontal technology layer, like stuff like IoT, stuff like AI, stuff like ML, which can be either verticalized or, you can have these horizontal platforms. Yeah, but I don't think there's specific things. I think it's really more sort of just like broader horizontal tech plays that we're looking at.
I think there's I know about Georgia, right? Georgia is, for whatever reason, a powerhouse in finance. Right. It has all the payment gateways, right, between TSYS, First Data. Now Square has also set up shop there.
Well, the Carolinas too, right? I think.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know much. Yeah, so I think we have a lot of finance-based startups in Atlanta as a result of that. So there's a lot of banks there as well, and so we find a lot of financial-focused startups come out of Georgia.
Right. And I also, I've traveled around Tennessee a little bit beyond Nashville. I've been to Knoxville too a couple times now. One, because I love the state, y'all are great. But two, there's a lot of interest in clean tech and energy and material sciences that are coming out of Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Yep. And I think that especially as ag tech becomes more of a thing, you're going to start to see more of those entrepreneurs, more of those companies, and I think more investment flood down south, because ag is a huge, huge potential area for new investments, especially around ag sciences. So I think that's something audience member Christopher Parks, great question, by the way, Christopher, thanks so much, that we're going to see. All right, we're gonna cut the crap for a second. I'm gonna ask y'all a real question. Not that, because most of these have been super platitudinous. We're gonna do a little role playing. Vijay, if you were an investor and you had $50 million, $1 billion to invest anywhere in the U.S. Where would you invest it? How much of it would you park in the Southeast? Or how much of it would you park anywhere in the world? You can do whatever you want, man. I just gave you $1 billion. Make it rain.
So I think because Southeast is the home, I'll actually split it 30% in the Southeast. 30%? 40% in the Southeast.
40% in the Southeast.
I think,
Can the ecosystem, ecosystem support that much capital?
Let me broaden that. I'll just say all of the East, right? 40% in the East, right? Because I think there are phenomenal companies coming out of MIT,
I don't want to go back up north, man. Don't make me do it.
So I think all across the East, right? I think, 30 to 40%. I'll probably put 40 to 50% in the West Coast. And then I'll put 20% back home in India.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair. Tyson, if you were an entrepreneur and you had to start a company somewhere in the United States or somewhere in the world, where would you start it and why?
You mean other than Tennessee? Just saying.
All right.
We're here.
All right.
I like country music. I'm just saying. It's pretty good. I mean, I will say, you know, what Vijay said earlier, I really think it's a critical point, which is, you know, when you raise capital, making your dollar stretch further, and further because you can reach critical points where your business could potentially become self-sustaining and you don't need capital.
Right.
It's critical, right? So if you can go somewhere where the talent is cheaper, it is meaningfully, I mean, the outcome that can drive is just, you know, it's night and day.
Isn't that Oakland? I mean,
even Oakland, you know, real estate's going up in Oakland.
Right,
I mean, it's, you know, Oakland's not Oakland like it used to be.
I'm sort of teasing. We are actually out of time. I'm sorry that I went long, but I really appreciate y'all listening. Thank you to the panelists. It was really an enjoyable and interesting conversation. And the Southeast, it's the future. All right, thank y'all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One more